Welcome back to the Startup Showdown podcast, where we discuss pitching, funding, and scaling startups. Join us as we interview winners, mentors, and judges of the monthly $120,000 pitch competition powered by Panoramic Ventures. We also discuss the latest updates in software, Web3, healthcare, tech, fintech, and more. Now, sit tight as we interview our guest and explore their journey through entrepreneurship.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Startup Showdown Radio, and this is going to be a good one. But before we get started, it's important to recognize our sponsor, Panoramic Ventures. Without them, we couldn't be sharing these important stories. Today on Startup Showdown Radio, we have Greg Reffner with Abstrakt. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me, Lee. Excited to be here and kind of dive into some of the details of our experience and kind of what we've learned along the way.
Well, before we get too far into things, just tell us kind of about Abstrakt. How are you serving folks?
Yeah, so we are a real-time call coaching software that essentially is your always-on sales coach. So imagine you're on a sales call, Lee, and an objection comes up that you've never heard before. Well, Abstrakt is listening to that conversation and then in real time providing insights or recommended responses to sales reps so they know exactly how to answer that question and don't lose that opportunity.
So this is just kind of happening in a stream on the side or something as I'm interacting with the prospect?
Yeah, so imagine I'm kind of looking at my computer through a Zoom call or on a phone call. And based upon what's happening in the conversation, there's we call it our heads up display is on your desktop, and it pops up and says, recognizes that they said, hey, this is too expensive, or call me back later. And in about 0.2 seconds, there's a little, we call it a recommended response card that pops up and says, hey, they said this, you say that.
So what was the genesis of the idea?
Yeah, so it kind of started about 8 years or so ago when I first started my career as an SDR, cold calling every single day. And back then, the tools that sales managers relied upon to coach their team were largely two things. One was called Whisper and one was called Barge. And what Whisper would do is it allow a manager to tap into a phone call while it was happening and in one ear, tell the sales rep what to say, while the sales rep was supposed to be paying attention to what the prospect was saying in the other ear. It was very distracting, didn't work very well. So that's kind of my early exposure to call coaching, sales coaching software. And that evolved into tools that most people know today as conversational intelligence, tools like Gong and Chorus. And I was a very early adopter of those. Love those technologies, attribute much of my success to being able to use those technologies effectively. And a couple of years ago, I was using speech to text on my iPhone, talking with my wife about what we wanted to name our firstborn son. And I was kind of like, why aren't we using this type of technology in B2B software sales? And kind of one thing led to another. And I realized that it was actually quite hard to do automated speech recognition in real time, kind of at scale. And so kind of early exposure to painful coaching tools, early adopter of technology that was coming out, along with a chance kind of thought in my mind as to, speech to text and how it could be applied to sales is kind of looking back the breadcrumbs that made up what an Abstrakt is today.
So you're not a technologist. You were a practitioner?
Yes, I'm definitely not a technologist. I know what code looks like, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how to write it or if it's good code.
But you were able to find kind of a problem to be solved, and you were able to communicate that with people who know the technology?
Yeah, so it was interesting because I knew the problem I wanted to solve, and being a non-technical person, being able to take that problem and communicate it in a way to a technical person that would start to paint the picture for kind of how the technology could be built was a challenge. And ultimately, I spent a long time, and there was actually, I spoke with 37 different kind of development firms before I found somebody who understood what I was trying to do, felt like it could be done, and was willing to invest the time with me to actually try to build a proof of concept. So it's definitely a challenge being the practitioner, as you said, and not the actual technology person behind building it, because going out and finding someone to help you build it is definitely a challenge.
Now, any advice for other non-technical founders to kind of, find that right fit? Because, I'm sure, as you mentioned, you had to kiss a lot of frogs, right, in order to find the right fit for yourself.
Yeah. So I think there's a website called Co-Founders Lab, and that's ultimately where I found my technical co-founding team. So I think just like kind of anything today, there's resources out there. So Co-Founders Lab, there's a couple LinkedIn groups for sales, marketing, operational type folks looking for technical co-founders. There's resources out there for non-technical people to find technical people, because, it makes sense. There's probably technical people in the world that are looking for their counterpart from a sales, marketing, operational perspective. So there's websites, there's resources, there's groups, there's meetups for people that want to find those technical co-founders. You don't have to kind of just kiss a lot of frogs. There's actually kind of very good groups and networks out there already established. You just got to find them in your area.
Yeah, it seems like there's a platform or a marketplace for pretty much everything nowadays.
I would say that's a fair statement. Yes, sir.
So now let's talk kind of the beginning of your career. You mentioned you spent some time as an SDR, but when you were younger, what was your kind of dream to become? Was it always an entrepreneur, always a founder?
Yes, I wanted to become a fighter pilot in high school, and turns out my eyesight wasn't good enough to be a fighter pilot. And they told me that I could work on planes if I went and got a mechanical or aerospace engineering degree. And so that was what my original degree was going to be in when I went to college. And Lee, it took me all of about 3 weeks to figure out that Friday morning classes combined with my interest in joining the fraternity did not make sense. They weren't going to turn out too well for me. So I went back and forth, changed my major, I think 5 or 6 times. Ended up getting kicked out of college, believe it or not, because I didn't go to any classes. And a couple of years later, invented a piece of exercise equipment. Fell in love with the idea of inventing things and kind of taking a napkin drawing and turning it into something that people use. Was moderately successful at doing that. But I had no idea what I was doing from a business perspective. Ended up running out of money, running that company into the ground. And ultimately just realized that I kind of enjoyed that process. I love the idea of working for myself, but I didn't know anything about how to run a company or even market or sell a company. And so that's when I was like, okay, I need to get into the ground floor somewhere, start my career, cold calling, building sales funnels, building pipeline. And that's when I made my way into the world of being an SDR.
So going through that process and learning other people's systems on how to work a funnel and participate in the moving a prospect through the funnel, that was foundational for you in terms of Abstrakt. Like those learnings sound like they kind of set the stage. You had the entrepreneurial drive, but that gave you some tools maybe to help make Abstrakt successful.
I think so. I mean, ultimately, I think when I talk with my peers that are at kind of going through the same stage where Abstrakt is, one of the problems they have is they don't know sales and marketing. They wouldn't know how to tell you how to build a marketing funnel or a lead generation engine. They wouldn't know how to sell their own software. And so I feel like I don't have that problem, right? I feel very confident and comfortable in that. And I can attribute a lot of what I know today to what I learned being okay, kind of stepping back and joining a company called Act On Software as an SDR. So yeah, I think it was foundational to kind of laying the groundwork for where we are today.
So now you got to participate in this kind of transition from conversational intelligence to real-time call coaching software?
Yeah. Yep. Yes, sir.
So you were able to kind of see the trade-offs in each one of those, and then how Abstrakt is maybe a better solution.
Yeah. So as one of our early customers put it, he said, with conversational intelligence tools out there today, it's like finding the black box after the plane's already gone down. It tells you what went wrong, what broke, what you could have done better. But you only find that after, you've already lost the opportunity. And with Abstrakt, imagine, autopilot kicks in when things go wrong and saves the opportunity. And so it was a kind of a natural progression. When you look around as consumers, we have things in our cars that drive our cars for us when we're not paying attention. We have things on our phone that help us to do things when we're maybe, not organized as we should be. We have tools in our house that automate some things that, we don't want to think about anymore. And so it becomes like this natural progression in the B2B world to start to think about how technology can be used in the same way to help us avoid those lost opportunities, as opposed to only waiting to find out they were lost until after they've already been lost.
Right. Like instead of doing the autopsy, you're kind of solving the problem and saving them in real life.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Now, how, from a technology standpoint, were you able to not only kind of capture good enough content where it's understanding the context of what's being said, because a lot of times there's subtext during a conversation, and to bubble up the right information for that salesperson at in that speed, at that speed?
Oh, that's a $1 million question. If you ask, so I asked one of our first solutions architects was a guy named Josh. And I asked Josh that same question one day. I was like, hey, how did we figure this out? And his answer still kind of sticks with me today, because he said, honestly, Greg, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we didn't come in with any preconceived notions of how things should be built. And what he meant by that was there's a lot of companies out there today that are worth billions of dollars, have more money in the bank that they know what to do with, that haven't been able to figure out what we figured out. And so we were able to look at building Abstrakt without kind of preconceived notions of how software should be built in the first place. And as a result of that, we were able to do some pretty interesting things through some algorithms, changing the way in which we tapped into cloud servers, using sound cards on computers. And, we weren't constrained by the status quo of how software is built today, because the team that said yes hadn't ever really built a B2B software application before. And so we came at this from a very creative perspective. We came at it with eyes wide open. And honestly, one of the algorithms that we use, Lee, was written in 1954. We went back in time to see how the first people who were trying to diagnose audio streams and audio channels looked at using mathematical equations to understand audio. And we applied those principles into our software. And as a result, we were able to build Abstrakt.
Well, it's an amazing story. How did you hear about Startup Showdown and Panoramic Ventures? What got them on your radar?
Yeah, so I was introduced to a couple of the guys, Dustin and Paraj, back in May of 2021 through a mutual connection. I had introduced Abstrakt to this mutual connection. She's like, hey, you got to compete in this thing called Startup Showdown. And I was like, what? I don't know anything about this. And so I reached out to the Startup Showdown guys and submitted my deck and made it to the semifinals, actually, the first time. And after a mentor day, I got some feedback that that the team at Panoramic didn't really think that Abstrakt could be built or that we could get it live kind of working in the wild. And they said, hey, come back to us when, if you've made any progress. And I kind of took that as a challenge, Lee. And
now it's personal.
Now it's personal, right? Don't tell me I can't do something. And so it must have been a couple days before the semifinalist round of last month's competition, where I saw something on LinkedIn about it. And so I reached out to Tammy and Dustin, and I was like, hey, I already competed in this thing once. Can I compete again? Here's the traction I've made. And they were like, absolutely, submit it. So made the semifinalists, made the finalist round. And, I guess the rest is history. But this was actually the second time that I came back to Startup Showdown.
So now, can you share a little bit about what you got out of this process of going through the Startup Showdown process that you feel was most beneficial? Doing these kind of events, they're a job unto itself. It can be, I don't want to say a distraction, but it's just another thing on your plate. And this is all work that has to be done. But, when you're trying to build software like you are, you got a lot on your plate. So how did this process help you and ultimately get to the goals that you're aiming for?
Yeah, so I think when you're going through like Mentor Day, it's one of the valuable things there is you're getting kind of rapid fire feedback on your deck. And as I went through Mentor Day and then had the opportunity to sit down with Paul before and kind of go over my deck again, one of the things that I realized that, hadn't been pointed out to me before is that my deck did a really good job of selling the company, but it did nothing to emotionally draw people into the story or the vision behind the product and why I wanted to build this and what I was trying to solve for. And so, thinking about what I got out of this, it was I needed to tell more of a story of how we got here and why this needed to be solved for and the impact it would have on people. Not just, hey, look at what we did, look at the cool product. It's, kind of Simon Sinek is famous for his book, Start With Why. Like I needed to do that more in my presentation. And so when I think about what I got out of this, it was get people tapped into the story of why this matters. And the moment I did that, Lee, I realized that everybody that I talked to has felt the pain of not knowing what to say when faced with an objection. And, the moment you can emotionally attach somebody to that, then it becomes something that they feel strongly about and, buy into. So that's what I got most out of this was don't be afraid to get people to buy into this emotionally and buy into the story behind why I want to do what we're doing.
And that's a great lesson for other founders that sometimes they get so enamored with the technology and they get that's all they're thinking about, but they're not really looking at it through the lens of the user, the buyer, and that emotional frustration that they're dealing with. And if you can get to the heart of that and make that go away, you have a really compelling sales case for them.
Absolutely. Spot on.
So now what's next for Abstrakt? Where are you on the roadmap and, how you plan to get there?
Yeah. So next steps, we have two pretty big product releases that we're going to be pushing out in May and June of this year that we were able to accelerate as a result of our winnings from the Startup Showdown. And really, we're on our path to raising our seed round of $2 million later this year. So pipeline strong. We got a great marketing engine growing. We have a very predictable engineering and product release cycle. So we've accelerated some things with this investment. We're looking to hire a couple more people internally from a product perspective, and raise $2 or $3 million hopefully middle of this year.
Now, have you got clarity around your ideal sales persona or the folks that should be buying the software?
Yeah. So what's been interesting about that, Lee, is I had a thesis around who that should be, and it was B2B software companies, mid-market, less than 1,000 employees. But what's been fascinating is that just organically, other markets, other buyers have come to us and found instant value in this. So who are we targeting? We're targeting B2B software companies. That being said, the problems that we solve are applicable across any vertical, any market that has a sales team. So we're going to remain hyper-focused on B2B software, but our product works organically across, again, anybody who needs to make a phone call and handle objections.
Now, has there been a mentor or somebody either that you met in person or that maybe you read about or maybe you read their books that has kind of left a mark in terms of inspiration or philosophy in your leadership in Abstrakt?
I think there's probably two. I like Steve Jobs. I've always been a fan of Steve Jobs. I know kind of ruffled a lot of people the wrong way, was tough to work with and work for. But we wouldn't have the iPhone. We wouldn't have smartphones without him. And the way some of the stories of how he pushed people, I know probably some folks on my team probably are frustrated with me at sometimes. But I think Steve Jobs is somebody that, changed the world. And I think you got to kind of be a little crazy to do that. And so I relate to him. And then the other person that I really like, and I think I try to live by, is a gentleman by the name of Jocko Willink. He was Navy SEAL, talks about extreme ownership and kind of owning responsibility for everything. Because when you own the responsibility and you don't pass the buck to somebody else, it allows you to make changes. So yeah, Steve Jobs, Jocko Willink, two people that I really aspire to kind of follow in their footsteps to some degree.
So what do you need more of right now, and how could we help? Do you need more funding, more clients, more talent?
Yeah. So right now we're hyper-focused on finding our first VP of engineering. So that's the person that I'm on the lookout for. I have 3 recruiting firms actively looking for that first person to come in and be kind of my counterpart, our technical leader. So that's number 1. 2, money, fundraising, that'll come. I wouldn't know how to spend $2 million today if I got $2 million, Lee. So we have some things to do, some answers to get from a marketing perspective and a pipeline generation perspective before we know what a repeatable sales and marketing motion looks like. So really right now, hyper-focused on finding VP of engineering to bring in-house, and 2, just going out and getting new customers and delighting those customers every step of the way.
Well, if somebody wants to learn more about Abstrakt, what's the website?
Abstrakt.ai, and Abstrakt spelled with a K, mainly because Abstrakt with a C was way too expensive.
And that's ABSTRAKT.ai.
Yes, sir.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You're doing important work, and we appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Lee. I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to share our story.
All right, this is Lee Cantor. We'll see you next time on Startup Showdown Radio.
As always, thanks for joining us, and don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Startup Showdown podcast so you get the latest episode as it drops. To learn more and apply to our next Startup Showdown pitch competition, visit showdown.vc. Goodbye for now.